Daniel sat alone in his car, parked on a quiet street under the dim glow of a flickering lamppost. His hands trembled slightly as he held his head in despair. He looked straight into the camera. His eyes filled with anguish and spoke softly but urgently. "I am a married man with children. On the surface I have everything, a loving wife, 2 beautiful daughters, a home, a career. But inside, I am living a lie. I am in love with Kwame, another man. That is the life I want, to be free to be with him. But how can I betray my wife? How can I destroy my family? Yet every day I stay silent feels like another nail in my coffin. Who am I if not honest? And who am I if I lose them all?" He paused, taking a shaky breath, then turned away, staring out at the rain-soaked streets of Lagos. Once upon a time in the city of Lagos, where the air buzzed with energy and the streets pulsed with life, Daniel lived a double life. By day, he was a devoted husband and father, navigating the demands of work and family with practiced ease. By night, he wrestled with secrets too heavy to bear. That evening, Daniel stood on the balcony of their modern apartment overlooking the cityscape. Below, vendors called out to passers-by, cars honked impatiently, and laughter echoed through the humid air. Inside, however, the atmosphere was tense. Grace, his wife, sat at the dining table scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed with unspoken concerns. Their daughters, Nia, 14, and Aisha, 12, argued over whose turn it was to clear the dishes, their voices rising above the clatter of cutlery. "You've been quiet all evening," Grace said suddenly, looking up at him. Her tone was probing, almost accusatory. "Is everything okay?" Daniel hesitated, forcing a smile. "Just work stress." Later that night, as the house fell silent, Daniel lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Memories flooded his mind. Childhood moments of being scolded by his father for showing interest in another boy. Teenage years spent hiding who he truly was. And now adulthood, trapped in a marriage built on expectations rather than authenticity. Unable to sleep, Daniel slipped out of bed and grabbed his phone. He scrolled through messages from Kwame, a man he'd met weeks ago at a support group for LGBTQ+ individuals. Their exchanges were cautious but warm, filled with shared fears and dreams of living openly someday. One message stood out. "We don't have to keep running forever. Someday we'll find peace." Daniel stared at the words, his chest tightening. For a moment, he considered deleting the conversation, but instead he typed back, "I wish I could believe that." As dawn approached, Daniel realized something had to change. But how could he tell Grace? How could he explain to his daughters that the man they called Dad had been living a lie? The weight of his secrets felt unbearable, yet letting them go seemed impossible. For now he would continue pretending. But deep down, he knew the cracks were beginning to show, and soon the foundation of his carefully constructed life might crumble entirely. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, his mind still replaying the events of the previous night. He had tossed and turned for hours, haunted by the words he'd typed to Kwame, words that felt both liberating and suffocating. As he prepared for the day, Grace stirred beside him, her voice groggy but concerned. "You've been acting strange lately," she said. "Are you sure everything's okay?" "I'm fine," Daniel replied quickly, avoiding eye contact as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. But inside he was anything but fine. The guilt of lying to Grace gnawed at him, yet the thought of telling her the truth terrified him even more. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself driving across town to meet Kwame at a quiet cafe tucked away in a quieter part of Lagos. It wasn't their first meeting. They had exchanged numbers after a support group session weeks ago, but it was the first time Daniel had initiated contact outside of text messages. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as he parked near the cafe. What was he doing? Was this betrayal? Or was it simply survival? When he walked in, Kwame was already seated, sipping a cup of coffee. He looked up and smiled warmly when he saw Daniel approach. "Hey," Kwame said softly. "I didn't think you'd come." Neither did I, Daniel admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Then Kwame broke the ice. "How are things at home?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "Complicated," he said finally. "Grace suspects something's wrong, but she doesn't know what. And my daughters? I don't know how they'd react if they ever found out." Kwame nodded sympathetically. "It's hard, I get it. But keeping this part of yourself hidden, it eats away at you. Trust me, I've been there." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the underlying tension remained. When they parted ways later, Daniel felt both relief and guilt. Relief for having someone who understood him, guilt for betraying Grace, even though nothing physical had happened between him and Kwame. As he drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to act normal, but cracks began to show. Nia noticed her father slipping out late at night or receiving mysterious calls. One evening, she confronted him after school. "Dad, why are you lying to us?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Caught off guard, Daniel stammered. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you last week," Nia said. "You were with someone." "Who is he?" Daniel froze, unsure how to respond. Before he could say anything, Grace walked in, sensing the tension. "What's going on here?" she asked. Nia stormed off, leaving Daniel and Grace alone. Grace pressed him for answers, but Daniel deflected, claiming it was work-related. Still, doubt lingered in Grace's eyes. Grace didn't bring up the confrontation again, but Daniel could feel her suspicion growing. She started paying closer attention to his movements, asking questions about his late nights and frequent absences. At first, Daniel managed to deflect her concerns, but the strain was taking its toll. He became increasingly withdrawn, snapping at the girls over minor issues and retreating to his room as soon as he got home. One evening, Grace decided to confront him directly. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, sitting down opposite him at the dining table. "Something's been off with you lately, and I want to know what it is." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just stress, Grace. Work has been overwhelming." Grace shook her head. "Don't lie to me. I know you better than that. Is there someone else?" The question hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he stood abruptly and walked out of the room, leaving Grace staring after him, tears welling in her eyes. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Grace discovered a receipt for a hotel stay tucked inside Daniel's jacket pocket. Confronting him that evening, she demanded the truth. Cornered, Daniel finally broke down. "I'm gay," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "I've known my whole life, but I've never been able to tell anyone, not even myself. I thought marrying you would make it go away, but it didn't. I'm sorry." Grace was devastated but listened as Daniel explained his lifelong struggle with his identity. While hurt, she recognized the pain he'd carried and agreed to seek counseling together. The days following Daniel's confession were fraught with tension. Grace retreated into herself, spending hours in silence while Nia and Aisha struggled to process what they'd learned. Nia, ever the protector of her younger sister, tried to shield Aisha from the fallout, but even she couldn't hide her anger. "How could you lie to us our whole lives?" she shouted during one particularly heated argument. Daniel stood there, shoulders slumped, unable to defend himself. He knew he deserved their anger, but it didn't make the weight of their words any easier to bear. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "I thought I was doing the right thing, for all of us." Grace eventually intervened, pulling Nia aside. "We need to get through this together," she told her daughter firmly. "Your father made mistakes, yes, but shutting him out won't help anyone." Though her voice was steady, her eyes betrayed the pain she still carried. Reluctantly, the family agreed to attend therapy sessions together. It wasn't easy, far from it, but it was a start. Their first therapy session was awkward and raw. The counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Adesina, encouraged everyone to speak openly about how they felt. At first, no one spoke. The room was heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Aisha broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Did you think we wouldn't love you anymore?" Daniel looked at his youngest daughter, his heart breaking. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing you all. Scared of being rejected. I didn't know how to be honest without destroying everything." Nia chimed in next, her tone sharp. "You already destroyed things by lying. Do you have any idea how confusing this is for us? For Mom?" Grace placed a hand on Nia's arm, silencing her. "Let him finish," she said softly. Turning to Daniel, she added, "We're here because we want to understand. Not just your truth, but how we move forward as a family." By the end of the session, small cracks of understanding began to form. It wasn't resolution, it would take time for that, but it was progress. Meanwhile, Daniel continued meeting with Kwame, though these encounters became increasingly difficult. Guilt gnawed at him every time he saw Kwame, knowing the toll his secrecy was taking on his family. During one meeting, Kwame gently confronted him. "You can't keep living two lives, Daniel. Sooner or later, you'll have to choose." "I don't know if I can," Daniel confessed. "Being with you feels like freedom, but leaving my family, it feels like betrayal." Kwame nodded sympathetically. "Love isn't supposed to feel like a prison, Daniel. But neither is honesty. You deserve happiness. Don't lose sight of that." Though Daniel appreciated Kwame's support, he knew their relationship couldn't continue indefinitely. His priority had to be healing his family. A few weeks later, Daniel met Kwame for what would be their final conversation. Sitting across from him in the same quiet cafe, Daniel took a deep breath. "I need to focus on fixing things with my family," he said. "I can't keep doing this to them or to you." Kwame listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Daniel finished speaking, Kwame simply nodded. "I understand," he said finally. "But remember this, Daniel, you deserve to live authentically. Don't let fear hold you back forever." They parted ways amicably, though Daniel felt a pang of loss. Kwame had been his lifeline during some of his darkest moments, but letting go was necessary for his family's sake. Back at home, Daniel threw himself into repairing his relationships. He spent more time with Nia and Aisha, helping them with school projects and listening to their concerns. Slowly, they began to open up again, though trust remained fragile. Grace, too, worked hard to rebuild their connection. They started having honest conversations about their marriage, acknowledging both its strengths and flaws. One evening, Grace surprised Daniel by suggesting they take a weekend trip together. Just the two of them. "We've been so focused on fixing things with the girls," she said. "But we need to reconnect too." The trip was bittersweet. They laughed and reminisced about happier times, but the shadow of Daniel's confession lingered. Still, it marked a turning point in their relationship, a step toward acceptance and forgiveness. Nia had always been the protector of her younger sister Aisha, but Daniel's revelation left her feeling vulnerable and unsure of how to navigate her emotions. One afternoon, after a particularly tense therapy session, she retreated to her room and began sketching furiously in a notebook she hadn't touched since childhood. Her drawings were raw and emotional, images of birds trapped in cages, storms raging over oceans, and fractured mirrors reflecting distorted faces. Over time, Nia's sketches evolved. The storm clouds gave way to sunlight breaking through, and the caged birds began to stretch their wings. When she finally showed one of her pieces to Daniel, a drawing titled Broken Wings, he was moved to tears. "This is beautiful, Nia," he said softly. "It feels like hope." Nia didn't respond with words, but her embrace spoke volumes. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a flicker of connection with his eldest daughter, a sign that healing was possible. While Nia expressed herself through art, Aisha found solace in writing. She started keeping a journal, filling its pages with letters addressed to Daniel. At first, her words were angry and accusatory. "Why did you lie to us? Why couldn't you just tell the truth?" But as weeks passed, her tone softened. She wrote about her confusion, her fears, and eventually, her hopes for the future. One evening, she handed Daniel a folded piece of paper. "I want you to read this," she said shyly. Daniel opened it carefully, his hands trembling as he read. "Dear Dad, I don't understand everything that's happening, but I know you're trying. I love you even if I'm still mad sometimes. Please don't give up on us." Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he pulled Aisha into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're stronger than you realize." As the weeks turned into months, small victories began to emerge within the household. Family dinners, once tense and silent, became opportunities for laughter and storytelling. Grace encouraged everyone to share something positive from their day, no matter how small. One evening, Aisha proudly announced that she'd made a new friend at school. Nia followed up by sharing that her art teacher had praised her latest project. Even Daniel joined in, talking about a meaningful conversation he'd had at his support group. Grace watched them all with a quiet smile, realizing how far they'd come. Though the road ahead would still have challenges, these moments of connection reminded her that their family was resilient and capable of rebuilding what had been broken. Grace had always prided herself on being a strong, supportive wife and mother, but Daniel's revelation forced her to confront parts of herself she hadn't fully acknowledged. In the early days after his confession, she felt betrayed, not just by Daniel, but by the life they had built together. It was as if the foundation of their marriage had crumbled overnight, leaving her unsure of who she was without it. But Grace wasn't one to stay stuck in despair. Determined to understand Daniel's journey, and her own role in their shared life, she began attending workshops and reading books about inclusivity, LGBTQ+ issues, and healthy communication. She joined an online support group for spouses of LGBTQ+ individuals, finding comfort in connecting with others who had walked similar paths. One evening, after a particularly enlightening session, Grace sat down with Daniel. "I want you to know that I'm trying," she said softly. "Not just for you but for all of us. I want our home to be a safe space, a place where everyone feels seen and loved for who they are." Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than I can say." Grace's efforts didn't go unnoticed by the girls either. Nia, ever observant, noticed how much calmer and more patient her mother had become. Aisha, too, began opening up more, sharing her thoughts and feelings during family discussions. Slowly but surely, Grace's growth became a cornerstone of their healing process. With Grace leading the way in fostering openness and understanding, the family began taking deliberate steps toward moving forward. One Saturday morning, Grace suggested they create a family vision board, a visual representation of their hopes and dreams for the future. They gathered magazines, markers, and poster boards, spreading them out across the dining table. "Let's each pick images or words that represent what we want for ourselves and for our family," Grace explained. "It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to feel right." At first, the girls were hesitant, unsure of what to choose. But as they flipped through the magazines, inspiration struck. Nia cut out pictures of art galleries and travel destinations, while Aisha selected images of beaches and animals. Daniel chose a photo of a sunrise over a city skyline, symbolizing new beginnings. Grace added words like love, acceptance, and together. When they finished, the board was a colorful collage of dreams and aspirations. As they stood back to admire their work, Grace smiled. "This is us," she said. "Broken pieces coming together to form something beautiful." The vision board became a constant reminder of their commitment to healing, not just individually but as a unit. It hung proudly in the living room, a testament to their resilience and hope for the future. Months had passed since Daniel's confession, and while the scars of betrayal still lingered, The family was beginning to heal. One Saturday morning, Grace surprised everyone with an announcement over breakfast. "I think it's time we took a trip," she said, smiling warmly. "Somewhere we can all relax and reconnect." Nia raised an eyebrow. "Like where?" "Zanzibar," Grace replied. "White sandy beaches, clear blue waters. It'll be good for all of us." Daniel looked at her, touched by the gesture. He knew this wasn't just a vacation. It was Grace's way of saying they were ready to move forward, to create new memories as a family. The girls were hesitant at first, but excitement slowly replaced their doubts. As they prepared for the trip, Daniel found himself reflecting on how far they'd come. Therapy sessions had taught them to communicate openly, to listen without judgment, and to forgive without forgetting. It wasn't easy, there were still moments of tension, but they were learning to navigate life together in a way that honored each other's truths. In Zanzibar, the family discovered a sense of peace they hadn't felt in years. They spent lazy afternoons lounging on the beach, building sandcastles with Aisha and skipping stones across the water with Nia. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Grace turned to Daniel. "Do you remember when we used to dream about adventures like this?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I never stopped dreaming," he admitted. "But I didn't think I deserved them anymore." Grace reached for his hand. "You deserve happiness, Daniel. We all do. And maybe this is our second chance." Her words stayed with him long after the sun disappeared beneath the waves. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a brighter future, not just for himself but for his entire family. On their last day in Zanzibar, Nia presented Daniel with a gift, a framed sketch titled Broken Wings. It depicted a bird soaring high above storm clouds, its feathers glistening in the sunlight. "It's for you," she said shyly. "Because even though things got really hard, I think we're finally flying again." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as he hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Nia. This means more to me than you'll ever know." Aisha chimed in, holding up a seashell necklace she'd made earlier that week. "And this is for Mom," she declared proudly. "So she remembers how strong she is." Grace laughed, pulling both girls into a group hug. In that moment, Daniel realized something profound. Love wasn't about perfection, it was about resilience. Despite everything they'd been through, their bond remained unbroken. When they returned to Lagos, the city felt different somehow, as if its vibrant energy mirrored the renewed spirit within their home. Daniel resumed attending support group meetings, this time openly sharing his story with others who struggled in silence. Grace joined him occasionally, offering her perspective as an ally and advocate. At school, Nia's artwork gained recognition, earning her praise from teachers and classmates alike. Her pieces often explored themes of identity and acceptance, inspiring others to embrace their own truths. Aisha, meanwhile, continued writing letters, not just to Daniel but to herself. Each word was a step toward understanding and forgiveness. One evening, as the family gathered around the dining table, Daniel raised a toast. "To us," he said, his voice steady. "For surviving the storms and finding our way back to each other." They clinked glasses, laughter filling the room. Though challenges lay ahead, they faced them together, with courage, compassion, and love. The story concludes with Daniel standing on the same balcony where it began. This time, however, he looks out over the city with a sense of peace. Grace joins him, holding his hand. Together they watch the sunrise, its golden light bathing the skyline in warmth. A voiceover from Daniel concludes the story. "Sometimes the hardest truths to face are the ones we hide from ourselves. But when we find the courage to speak them, even silently, we give others permission to do the same. My journey hasn't been easy, but it's taught me that authenticity is worth every sacrifice. And though my family and I are still healing, I know we'll continue to grow together."